between the 20th of January and the 22nd of January 1944, it was here at this river crossing, just to the east of the small Italian village of San Angelo, that America would see one of its biggest military blunders of World War II.
The Battle of the Rapido River, fought between January 20th and 22nd, 1944, was part of the broader First Battle of Cassino and ended in a costly failure for the Allied forces. Despite the operation being abandoned after only 2 days, the effort resulted in significant casualties for the US 36th Infantry Division and achieved none of its objectives. The Allied plan for January 1944 involved a four-pronged assault on the German Gustav Line. 3 attacks were part of the First Battle of Cassino, focused on the main 5th Army front, while the 4th consisted of the Anzio landings behind German lines. The goal was for the French to attack north of Cassino on January the 12th, securing the high grounds near the planned crossing point. This would be followed by a British assault to the south, trapping the German forces along the Rapido River between 2 Allied forces. Once these positions were secured, the US 36th Division would then cross the Rapido, establish a bridgehead, and allow the US 1st Armoured Division to break out into the Leary Valley. The Rapido crossing was planned for January the 20th, just 2 days before the Anzio landings, to divert German attention and resources away from that beachhead area. However, the plan quickly unravelled. The French attack made limited progress and was abandoned after only 4 days. The British, faring slightly better, crossed the Garigliano River but failed to secure the critical high ground. These setbacks left the 36th Division unsupported on both flanks. Despite these failures, General Mark W. Clark, commander of the US 5th Army, decided to proceed with the attack, hoping it would prevent the Germans from shifting troops from Cassino to Anzio. General Fred L. Walker, the commanding general of the US 36th Infantry Division, was skeptical of this mission's feasibility and confided his doubts in his diary. The task facing the 36th Infantry Division was daunting. The division had already suffered heavy losses at Salerno and San Pietro, leaving many inexperienced soldiers in its ranks as replacements.
I'm walking along the eastern bank of the Gari River here in Italy. Just further to the northeast is the Rapido River. They flow into one another. And between the 20th of January 1944 and the 22nd of January 1944, the 36th Texas National Guard Division, that was part of US 2nd Corps here in this part of Italy, along the Gustav Line, attempted a river crossing here that would see casualty figures close to that of Omaha Beach. As a result of the Allies stalling against the Gustav Line during the winter of 1943 and into 1944, General Mark Clark, the commander of the US 5th Army, had to come up with some sort of strategy to try and breach through the Gustav Line and proceed northward towards Rome.
The Rapido River posed significant natural and man-made obstacles. Its floodplain was largely on the American-held eastern side, making any approach visible to German defenders, and the Germans had flooded the area and mined the dry patches and stripped the terrain of cover. Heavy equipment had to be carried across 2 miles of open ground under constant German artillery, mortar and machine gun fire. On the western bank, German forces had constructed a network of bunkers, trenches and fortified positions, with the town of San Angelo serving as a stronghold.
So I'm currently stood on the eastern bank of the Gari River. It was the objective of the 143rd Infantry Division of the 36th Texans to get to the west bank there, move through San Angelo and then continue west to their finish line for this particular operation. Now, looking at the terrain around, we can see the Gari River is pretty fast flowing. About 8 miles an hour is the speed of the current. And although it's not a particularly deep river, nor is it particularly wide, that fast flowing coupled with these really high banks, some of them well over 6 foot in places, made this river crossing exceptionally difficult for the men of the 36th Infantry Division.
The attack began under cover of heavy fog at 8 p.m. on January the 20th, 1944. To prepare for the assault, 16 battalions of Allied artillery pounded the German defences, but the barrage proved insufficient to secure a realistic chance of success. The division's 141st and 143rd Regiments spearheaded the crossing, with the 142nd Regiment held in reserve. On the far side of the river, the German defences were manned by troops from the 15th Panzergrenadier Division, commanded by General Eberhard Roth. This division was part of the 14th Panzer Corps, led by General Fridolin von Senger, a former Rhodes Scholar and attached to the German 10th Army under the command of General Heinrich von Feitinghoff. Overseeing all German forces in Italy was Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, a seasoned and defence-orientated commander who had previously led Axis forces in Sicily and served as Luftwaffe chief in North Africa. The Germans were well aware of an impending American attack, as US patrols had crossed the river days earlier, triggering skirmishes that prompted the Germans to intensify their preparations. They reinforced the low-lying terrain by adding more barbed wire and clearing trees to improve fields of fire. General Clark dismissed the idea of a daylight crossing and ordered the attack to take place under the cover of darkness.
So the 15th Panzergrenadier Division, the Germans who held the western bank of the Gari and the Rapido River, were widely regarded as one of the best German divisions along this section of the line here in Italy and in Italy as a whole. The defensive structures that they'd put in place ensured that everywhere along this section of the river was crossed with interlocking fields of fire, artillery and minefields. So any attempt to cross at this location was always going to be difficult for the Americans, and sadly, between the 20th and the 22nd, it proved fatal for them.
Troops were tasked with crossing the river using wooden boats, rubber rafts, or footbridges constructed by the divisional engineers. Reaching the crossing site was made even more difficult by days of heavy winter rain combined with melting snow from the mountains, which flooded the lowlands and turned them into a mire of marshy terrain. Engineers attempted to mitigate the conditions by spreading gravel over the waterlogged ground, but the relentless mud rendered it impossible for trucks to reach the area. As a result, troops had to haul assault boats and cables to the river by hand. Over a stretch of about 2 miles, soldiers carried cumbersome 24-man rubber rafts and massive 12-man wooden assault boats.
So in the evening of the 20th of January 1944, the men of the 143rd Infantry Regiment advanced across these fields, advancing through lanes cleared by engineers because this whole area had been sown with mines by the Germans.
The wooden boats, each 13 feet long and weighing over 400 pounds, posed a significant physical challenge even before reaching the riverbank. About a mile from the Rapido River, the advancing troops came under heavy German shelling, plunging the operation into chaos amid the winter darkness. In one company alone, the commander was killed, the second in command was wounded, and 30 enlisted men were lost to a single artillery volley. The barrage tore holes in rubber boats, shattered wooden ones, and scattered or buried the reflective tape marking the path through the mud. By the time the 141st Regiment reached the river, nearly a third of their boats were unusable. Soldiers, weighed down with weapons and ammunition, struggled to board the remaining intact boats, which swung wildly in the fast-moving current. Some boats successfully made it across, but others were struck by artillery, capsized or carried downstream. Of the 4 footbridges planned for the crossing, engineers managed to construct only one. 2 companies used it before it was destroyed by enemy fire. By 10 a.m, the initial assault was called off and the gunfire from the isolated 36th Division troops who had crossed the river gradually fell silent.
So behind me is the small village of St. Angelo, but if you look closely you'll notice that it sits on a ridge. It's elevated. So on the western bank, the Germans were overlooking the route that the Americans were taking as they came to try and cross the Gari and the Rapido River here. Also as well, further off to my right and in the distance, there's more ridge lines where the Germans had sited defensive emplacements so that they were able to overlook and have a commanding field of fire on this area. Now, ironically, Major General Walker of the 36th in 1918 had been at the Marne River when his battalion of 1,200 men had helped to cut down 10,000 Germans as the Germans attempted to cross the Marne River. So Walker knew that a river crossing of this sort against a well-trained and dug-in enemy with a commanding field of fire over the river was always going to be a suicidal mission.
On January the 21st, with the Anzio landings imminent, Clark ordered another attack to maintain pressure at Cassino. The 143rd Infantry managed to get 3 battalions across the river at 2 a.m. on January the 22nd, but they could not build bridges to bring in supporting armour. By the afternoon, the attack was deemed a failure and the regiment retreated. Meanwhile, the 2nd and 3rd Battalions of the 141st Infantry crossed back over the river but found no survivors from the 1st Battalion, which had been overrun by the Germans. Bridge construction was halted due to intense German fire, and the battalion was pinned down within 600 yards of the river. By evening, most of their officers were wounded, and only 40 men managed to swim back to safety. In 48 hours, the 36th Division suffered over 2,000 casualties, including 155 dead, 1,052 wounded, and 921 missing or captured, all with no meaningful progress. The disaster at the Rapido was exacerbated by the strained relationship among Allied commanders. General Fred L. Walker of the 36th Division had opposed the crossing, citing the overwhelming challenges and the poorly chosen location. He proposed alternative crossing points, but his concerns were dismissed by Clark and other senior leaders. After the battle, Walker was relieved of many of his officers and eventually reassigned, a move that many saw as scapegoating by Clark to deflect blame. The controversy surrounding the Rapido River crossing persisted long after the war. Survivors of the 36th Division demanded accountability, accusing Clark of sacrificing their lives in a futile and poorly conceived operation. In 1946, a congressional hearing investigated the attack, but Clark was ultimately exonerated. The Secretary of War defended the crossing as a necessary operation under the circumstances. For the soldiers who fought at Rapido, the experience left deep scars. Private First Class Bill Hartung described how the battle changed him forever, saying, "I had turned into an old man overnight. I know I was never the same person again." Despite the failed crossing at Rapido, there were many acts of heroism, and one such was that demonstrated by Staff Sergeant Thomas E. McCall. On January the 22nd, 1944, Company F was assigned to cross the river near St. Angelo. Staff Sergeant McCall commanded a machine gun section assigned to provide critical fire support for the advancing riflemen. Under cover of darkness, Company F approached the river crossing site, braving the relentless enemy mortar, artillery and machine gun fire. Despite constant bombardment, they crossed an ice-covered bridge under heavy attack. Upon reaching the western bank, significant casualties left the unit disorganised and vulnerable. In the face of deadly fire sweeping across the flat, exposed terrain, Staff Sergeant McCall remained calm, rallied his men, and forged them into an effective fighting unit. He led his section across muddy ground under withering fire, guiding them through a barbed wire entanglement to secure a road, where he expertly positioned their weapons to protect the battalion's front. During the advance, an enemy shell struck one of his machine gun positions, killing the assistant gunner, wounding the gunner and destroying the weapon. Undeterred by the peril of incoming enemy fire, McCall crawled forward across open terrain to administer first aid to the wounded man, then dragged him to safety with assistance from another soldier. Meanwhile, the crew of the second machine gun was incapacitated by shrapnel, leaving McCall as the sole operational member of his machine gun section. Exhibiting extraordinary aggressiveness and determination, Staff Sergeant McCall took the initiative, advancing alone with a machine gun slung over his hip. He charged 30 yards towards an enemy machine gun nest, firing 2 bursts that eliminated the crew and neutralized the position. Moments later, another enemy machine gun opened fire. McCall fearlessly stormed the second position, killing 4 enemy gunners while firing from the hip. Despite overwhelming odds, he continued his assault on a third machine gun nest located 50 yards behind the first 2. Braving intense enemy fire, McCall was last seen advancing courageously toward the position, firing his weapon with unwavering resolve. Despite being taken prisoner by the Germans for his actions, he was awarded the Medal of Honor the following year on April 17th, 1945.
So here in the village of St. Angelo itself, overlooking the banks of the Gari and the Rapido River, is this wonderful memorial to the men of the 36th Texas Division who fell here during those tragic days in January 1944.